Welcome to Module 5. What we're going to be looking at today is how to create light with color. So first we're going to look at the definition of light, what that term means. Then we're going to look at how color itself is what creates light through the use of value and hue, secondly intensity, and thirdly temperature. I want to start with a quote that I've used many times before from Hofmann. In nature, light creates the color. In the picture, color creates the light. So it's very important to understand that when we're looking out in the big world at our subject, it is the light falling across that subject that creates our perception of color. Whereas in a painting, it is the way we use the paint pigments, the color, that creates that sense of light. It's how we use value, how we use intensity, and how we use temperature. First of all, let's think about what light is. It's a sense of illumination. It's a sense that there is a light falling across the subject. So what we're talking about is using color to create that sense of illumination. First, let's look at what local and optical color actually means. Most people use local color. Local color is when you take the actual physical color of the object and you add black to darken it or white to lighten it. Optical color is perceptual color. It is choosing and selecting colors based on the way that light falls across the subject and our eye perceives that light, altering and changing the inherent physical color of the subject. The difference in the way that color is used in those two approaches is very dramatic. As you can see on the left, this building that is being struck by very warm afternoon fall light loses some of that sense of illumination through the mixture of white into the main physical color. Also loses some of that sense of illumination with the addition of black to darken the color. What ends up happening so often when people rely on local color is that they end up with a painting that is somewhat chalky. So value alone, and in both of these paintings, the value is what is creating the strong sense of color and illumination. But with value alone, you can still create a sense of light, but it's not going to be as strong as when you incorporate hues in as well. So we're going to talk about moving from local to optical color in the way we approach creating a sense of illumination. Optical color equals perceptual color. Perceptual color is based on the way our eyes actually really detect and record color in our brain rather than what our minds tell us we're seeing. You get a richer sense of color and light when you choose to use optical or perceptual color. In order to create a strong sense of light, the real key is to use contrast in color. So if you want to create a strong sense of hard, brilliant light, you want to use high contrast in color. So you want to have a very large difference between your lightest and your darkest colors, between your brightest and your dullest, between your warmest and your coolest. If you want to create a sense of soft, diffused light, then you would want to use lower contrast in color. So an example of something in strong light would be that building that we just saw with the warm afternoon light flooding across the top of the building. Whereas an example of soft diffuse light might be a foggy, misty morning where there's little or no sun evident. So here is an example of that strong, warm fall light. This is actually winter moving into spring. It's early winter. And you can see that there is a strong high contrast in value, in intensity, and in temperature. To create that sense of strong light, the key is that strong contrast. So you want to have contrast between light and dark, between bright and dull, and warm and cool. When you employ all three of those things, you get the most strong sense of illumination. It will work if you employ any of the three, but again, the strongest is going to come when you employ all three. So let's pick that apart just a little bit. When you look at the face of this square in this diagram that is being illuminated by the sun, that's almost at a 45-degree angle, in that light illuminated section, you have a very light value and hue, you have a bright intensity, and a very warm temperature. In contrast, in the area of shadow, you have a very dark value and hue, you have a relatively dull intensity, and a much cooler color in relationship to the front face of the square. You can see that reflected in this photograph of the building that was used as a source for those earlier paintings, both the local and the optical color example. The top edge of the building is catching the late afternoon sun, which is warming up the inherent red brick color of the building to a relatively golden orange color, whereas the shadow area of the building is duller and cooler. You can see that more clearly when we pull out color spots using photo editing software to look at what the actual colors are in those areas. So the light is hitting on the building, and that's going to be a warm, more intense color where the shadow is. You have a cooler, more violet color. The inherent physical color of the building is red brick, but the light playing across the surface, or its absence, dramatically alters our perceived color of the building. You can see that in these next several paintings that I have in here as examples of very strong illumination. In the shadow areas of this painting, you see cool colors. In the highlight areas, you see warm, intense colors. You do not see very many dull colors in the more illuminated sections. You see the duller colors in the areas that are in shadow. So use the full range of color, both value and hue, intensity and temperature, and you'll begin to create that strong, rich sense of illumination. In this painting, you can see the very cool violet playing across the cotton fields as the clouds move across and keep that area in shadow. In this one, the illuminated sections of the fields on either side of the road are much more intense and light in value than the shadowed areas of the fields. But bright, strong light is not the only way that you can create a sense of light in your paintings. Soft diffused light can be equally intriguing, and you can create that through your use of lower contrast in color. So in this photograph of a misty morning, impending rain, there was rain on its way, on the coast, you can see the very cloudy sky with a little bit of illumination along the horizon line, and very little difference between the different areas of the land. The only sense of illumination really comes, strong illumination comes, from the reflected light of the sky in the water. You can see the same thing in a painting from the same morning, where there is low contrast in the colors that are chosen for the land, and a little bit more intense colors in the water where the light is being reflected. So let's look at a diagram of that lighting situation. When you look at the same block and you look at the illuminated side, you're going to have a lower contrast than we did in the one with strong lighting. So you have a low to medium contrast in value and hue, intensity, and in temperature. So you simply will not have as intense colors in a diffused lighting situation. Remember that diffused means like rain, fog, mist, anything that breaks the light up and makes the light direction less strong. So the face of the block here is much duller and much lower in value than it was in the more illuminated one. So here's that photograph again. And notice it in the land, you have really only two values, the shadow area of the marsh and the top plane of the marsh, but you don't have streaks of light. There's very little difference in the value between the shadowed areas of the marsh and the tree line in the background. So the contrast in value is radically diminished. You can see that again when we pull out the color spots, that there really are very, very few differences in color, whether we're talking about value and hue or intensity or temperature. This is really a very limited color scheme that looks more like it's an analogous color scheme, colors that are very close to each other on the color wheel. Here's another painting from that morning with that same low contrast in color between the land and the tree line and even into the sky and water. A different subject, but again, reflecting that low contrast in value, intensity, and temperature in the land itself, which is not illuminated. The only area of illumination in this painting, strong illumination, is in the sky itself. So what we've covered here today is the definition of light first. Remember, it's a strong sense of illumination. And how color can be used to create light. So controlling the contrast in color is going to give you the strongest sense of illumination. So remember that by controlling the contrast in value and hue, intensity and temperature, you can control what kind of lighting situation you create. For strong hard light, you want high contrast, and for soft diffuse light, you want low contrast. I hope this has been helpful, and I look forward to seeing what you produce in this module, and want to wish everyone happy painting.